Hello, people of the internet. It is I, Alexander Hill, historical fantasy author and local retard. I've been off the internet for a while, a long time. You can see this by the evidence that is the fact that I need a haircut really badly and haven't gotten one. This is because of a myriad of factors. This video was supposed to come out like a month ago, but I am just now recording it, like probably a week before it comes out. So first, Blood Message was a thing that came out, or the trailer at least, and I was like really into that, so I made a whole video about it instead of doing this video. And in that video, I promised that I would have the video released by the next week. But then I got sick. I got really sick for like a while, and for some reason whenever I get sick it always lasts like, I get man flu, but I get it for woman sickness amounts of time, if that makes any sense. Oh yeah, also my workflow has been a little slower. This is not really an excuse, but my workflow is slower because I have been playing the horse game. Anyway, yeah, I'm back now. This is Interregnum 2, worst king in German history. Let's get into it.
Why are you fucking with me? Why are you fucking with me? Why are you fucking with me? Huh? Get the fuck back to work! I'm gonna talk to my computer. Fuck off my expo chef now! We're firing! 76 feet! Fucking 34 shit! Shut the fuck up! Yo, French cousin, just shut the fuck up!
Worst king in German history might be a little hyperbolic to some people. Not to me. See, Adolf von Nassau is by far, in my opinion, the worst king the Holy Roman Empire has ever had. How do I know this? Because everyone who is as bad as he was either an absentee or a literal child. When it comes to being king of the Holy Roman Empire, my metric for success is how much you, as king, help the empire prove Voltaire wrong. Voltaire is the Holy Roman Empire is neither a Holy Roman or an empire guy, and I have to mention him in every episode because the only thing anyone knows about the HRE is that quote. Some monarchs are really good at proving Voltaire wrong. Others are worse. Generally speaking, it was more good than bad for the first few hundred years. This was thanks to the existence of mostly stable dynasties, and when I say mostly, I'm not counting the 80 years of civil war that might have broken the empire apart just a little bit. And these are people like the Ottonians, the Salians, and the Hohenstaufens, who were able to consolidate power in the empire and turn this into a mostly functioning feudal state, at least more functioning than France was at the time. And after the fall of the Hohenstaufens, the Voltaire slider started to go down a bit towards failed state, but then the electors put Rudolf von Habsburg on the throne. If you didn't see my last Interregnum video, let's just say he was really, really good at his job. And it looked like the Habsburgs would be the next dynasty to rule over the empire. But then Rudolf died before he could become emperor, so he couldn't get his son elected as king, and now the question of who rules over the empire is left up to who else but the electors again. Last time, the electors were unbelievably greedy in trying to pick someone who was just powerful enough to get the job done, but not too powerful as to be able to tell them what to do. They got incredibly, really lucky with Rudolf. They selected Rudolf thinking he would be one of those people who's just barely competent enough to do his job while being weak enough for the electors to, gobble up imperial territories like a bunch of hungry hippos. Having not learned any lessons about how this philosophy of choosing people could possibly go wrong, the electors once again chose someone who fit the original super greedy bill. And I believe that it's with Adolf von Nassau that the Holy Roman Empire stops being Holy Roman or an empire for the majority of its existence from that point onward, thus proving Voltaire right. And yeah. My thesis is that Adolf von Nassau made the Holy Roman Empire into a failed state. My name is Alexander Hill. As I mentioned before, I am a historical fantasy author, and welcome back to your regularly scheduled HRE ramblings. If you're watching this, I know for a fact you are somewhat autistic about history. You should probably subscribe and read my book. It's for you, yes, specifically you, because you're on this video, and it's better than whatever meds your doctor could prescribe you. It's urban fantasy Uncharted, including Alexander the Great's tomb, or like if Indiana Jones said fuck it and shot the aliens, or if Dan Brown had balls and knew kung fu. I have a video that explains the concept if you're interested. If you're not sold on it, you can sign up to my emailing list to get notifications on when it goes on sale, which I do have an audiobook in the works, which will be coming out. I plan to put it on this channel whenever it gets done, but I will release the chapters once every week in order to incentivize you to buy the rest of it, but eventually it will be all out for free. And the book will go on sale coinciding with the initial release of the first few chapters of the audiobook and after the last chapter of the audiobook is out. So if you want to know when that happens, emailing list. Also, you can just go and read the first 2 chapters on my website for free. All the links to everything are in the description. Now, I'm going to talk shit about Adolf von Nassau. I don't know if anyone particularly cares about that or would get offended by me doing that. Maybe like the one person from Nassau who even figures out that this video exists in the first place. But I do want to make clear that almost everyone involved in being king of the Romans tried their best. Nassau is included in that. He tried. But tried is not... There is do or do not. There is no try.
What the fuck is that? Get my gaff, you green cunt.
Prior to the Interregnum, which is the time period we're talking about here, the election for King of the Romans was basically rigged as long as the current king had a son to pass the title to, excluding a few rebellions here and there. One that might have stranded the heir in Sicily while everyone in Germany was fighting it out, and they had to wait for the kid in Sicily to grow up and then take power. And then he, I don't know, was involved with like the assassins or some shit. Frederick II is weird. If all was going as planned, the electors should have voted for Albrecht von Habsburg, Rudolf's son, as king. But the Habsburgs were powerful now, which means they don't get to be in the running. Nope. And the last few hundred years of dynastic rule had proved that no matter what, the prince and the emperors will always fight each other unless they're busy fighting the Pope. Also, the elections couldn't be rigged anymore because all of the minor lords of the empire lost their votes, so now there were only 7 votes to go around, and none of them were owned by a Habsburg. And this is a really funny example, but also kind of cool example of a nation becoming less autocratic by shrinking the franchise of people who can vote, which isn't something we really think about as a possibility today. I'm not trying to say anything with that, I just think it's neat. The princes, looking out for their own interests, dropped Albrecht, and the next most obvious candidate was Wenceslaus, son of Ottokar, who, if you don't remember who Ottokar is, got his ass beat by Rudolf in the last episode and was displayed on a spike in Vienna for like 6 months. And while Wenceslaus was able to get the Margrave of Brandenburg and the Duke of Saxony on his side, the agreement they made was under the condition that Wenceslaus could pick who they voted for, as long as it wasn't Wenceslaus himself or Albrecht. Because Wenceslaus is also powerful, and if you're powerful, that means you don't get to be emperor. The Count Palatinate, meanwhile, had promised Rudolf before his death that he would vote for Albrecht, and is making good on that oath, so props to him. So the only people who are undecided are the 3 archbishops, Mainz, Trier, and Cologne. And they want someone who's vaguely connected to both the Habsburg and the Premysl dynasties. By this point in history, basically all the noble families are kind of related to each other. but we're not into like full Habsburg jaw yet. So we're like a 5 on the incest scale. Or at least that was the reason they gave for picking who they picked. The person they picked was Adolf von Nassau. He was a poor count as opposed to Rudolf, who was a rich count, and only owned half of his actual title of Nassau, since the county in question had been partitioned upon his father's death, like pretty much every territory in the HRE, which is why it looks like this. Conveniently, Adolf also fought alongside the Archbishop of Cologne in a recent war and was a loyal supporter of the church, but we don't have to talk about that because that's not important. He was also willing to sign just about any piece of paper that the electors put in front of him, so yeah, sure, family connections. That's why we want him. And before he could get elected, pretty much all the electors made Adolf sign a bunch of deals to promise favorable decisions and to never make certain places free imperial cities, and asked for guarantees and promises that let the electors basically do whatever they wanted. And with all that kind of just swept under the rug, King Adolf von Nassau is elected and crowned King of the Romans. You might be thinking why anyone in Adolf's position would sign up to be basically a puppet of the electors. Well, he saw how Rudolf made his family one of the most wealthy and powerful in the empire by ascending to the throne as a nobody count, and Adolf figured he would be able to do the same thing. The issue being is that Rudolf knew how to play the princes against each other, and Adolf... You'll see. Adolf's first order of business as king was to get out of all these deals he made to get the electors to vote for him. And just because Adolf isn't quite as good at Rudolf at outwitting people doesn't mean he isn't cunning. Adolf started to become really active in touring the empire with his court and, hearing out cases, dispensing justice, doing king shit. His court became a gathering place for a lot of small and middle-sized counts, and eventually he had enough clout among his nobles to give the archbishop the slip. Archbishop of Mainz, I think. He then started making nice with the Wittelsbachs and the Habsburgs, and established an enemy of the Archbishop of Cologne as Landvogt, which is your, basically imperial bureaucrat of the Lower Rhine. While all that is sound strategy and all, it doesn't make you an imperial prince, necessarily, to, hoodwink the Archbishop of Mainz and basically, he's not a puppet, but he's not a prince either. Adolf's opportunity to do that would have to come in the form of a huge land grab. And lucky for him, there's a civil war going on with the House of Wettin, who rule over Meissen, Thuringia, and Pleisen, which looks a little bit like this. Well, okay, civil war might be inaccurate. It was one guy, Landgraf Albrecht the Degenerate, no relation to Albrecht von Habsburg, fighting against his entire family for 2.5 decades. Albrecht the Degenerate flees to Adolf's court and offers to sell his lands to Adolf for 12,000 mark of silver. This is an insanely good deal, since Wettin lands hold probably one of the richest mines in all of Germany. The catch is that if you remember what I just said, Albrecht is fleeing from his lands that he intends to sell to Adolf. So practically speaking, Adolf would have to go and take over those lands for himself with an army. That would cost a lot of money. Money that he would have to gain by conquering a place with a lot of rich silver mines. This is why the 13 and 1400s were such a shit show, is because of that. But if he succeeded, somehow, Adolf would be on par with Rudolf's acquisition of Austria, and it would make his family rich. Except, as we stated before, Adolf is poor. So how is he going to fund an army? Well, money from your lands is not the only way to do it. The income from the imperial lands isn't nothing, but it's not enough to go and fucking conquer Thuringia. And the electors, half of whom Adolf just finished burning bridges with, would rather die than heed a call to arms from him, especially a call to arms to make an overt land grab in the middle of Eastern Germany. So where might a king like Adolf find a source of funding? Well, that's where King Edward I of England comes in, because he is currently in an alliance with Flanders and Burgundy to fight the French after France tried to steal some of that sweet, sweet textile money for themselves from Flanders. If you don't know, Bruges, really nice city. It's the only place in Belgium I can really recommend. Every other place in Belgium I went to, which was mostly around Liège, shithole. But Bruges is really nice, and they made a lot of clothes. And they made a lot of money off those clothes. And France was like right there. They were right there, and they really wanted some of that money. So Adolf decided to get in on the dog pile and became effectively a mercenary for the King of England. Obviously, this is a really bad look for the King of the Holy Roman Empire to be a mercenary for the King of England, especially when said mercenary then takes another payment that is larger from the King of France to fuck off.
So I'm going to pay you $100 to fuck off.
Additionally, Adolf's foray into Thuringia was stepping on the Archbishop of Mainz and King Wenceslaus' zones of influence, who happened to be two of the most powerful electors among the seven. And in 1297, when everyone gathered in Prague for Wenceslaus' delayed coronation, someone floated the idea of perhaps deposing Adolf. The Archbishop of Mainz would eventually invite Albrecht von Habsburg, the guy the electors left out of the running in the first place, to voice his grievances against Adolf von Nassau. The Archbishop, along with the Duke of Saxony and the Margrave of Brandenburg, opened a case against Adolf and soon received word from the Archbishop of Cologne and Wenceslaus to act on their behalf. Even the Count Palatinate got in on the whole deposition trial. Adolf was accused and convicted of breaching the peace, violating his agreements, the extraction of funds from the church, and, just to sprinkle a little sacrilege on top, desecration of the host. So Adolf is out and Albrecht is in. Thank you, electors, for taking 6 years to detour to what Rudolf wanted anyway. Great job. The electors were basically forced to elect Albrecht since Adolf wouldn't give up his crown without a fight, so they needed to elect someone who had, what's that again? Just enough strength to actually do the job, but wasn't strong enough to take on all the electors at the same time? Must be the Habsburgs again. And, Albrecht has the money to fund a war against Adolf. Albrecht had already been chasing Adolf around Swabia and the Palatinate for a few weeks, and the war basically looked like a Scooby-Doo chase until word reached the other electors that Adolf had been officially deposed, and then the gloves were off. Adolf was forced to try and throw a fucking Hail Mary to defeat Albrecht and take him captive before he could be put in charge of the electoral armies, because they are huge. Since Adolf was coming to him, this is some basic Sun Tzu for you all, but you generally don't want to be forced to go after your enemy, because then you kind of just throw all the decisions about where the battles fought and whatnot out the window. So Albrecht set up camp on a hill where the sun was at his back, forcing Adolf's army to march uphill into the sun. This wasn't going to go well for Adolf, since in addition to the land and sun, the clock was also against him. There's no twist here, there's no underdog story. No, Adolf just gets fucking annihilated. Albrecht, because he's petty like that, doesn't allow Adolf to be buried in Speyer Cathedral with all the other kings and emperors. But Albrecht's successor will let it be transferred, and that is where Adolf still is today. I even went and visited him. Rudolf is also there, and so are Henry the Third, Fourth, and Fifth. I'm certain they love being in the same tomb together after everything that happened. Watch my investiture controversy video. And also, very sad, Barbarossa's wife and his daughter, who died as a child because Barbarossa died in a random river in Turkey and is somewhere. Last video, when I introduced the Interregnum as a time period, I told you it was a power struggle between the Habsburgs, Wittelsbachs, and Luxembourgs. So Adolf's family will never rise to become kings again. But they do become Dukes of Luxembourg in 1890, where they still rule today, somehow. So they kind of managed to dodge having King Adolf be their unfortunate legacy. And usually this is where I would end the video on the death of the focal figure, but Albrecht himself has a bit of a story that I think I can squeeze in. So the first thing to realize about Albrecht is that he's not as much his father's son as he would like to be. He didn't have the charm or charisma that Rudolf employed against his friends and foes alike. He was reportedly a blight on the eyes and had a distasteful attitude, which I think is about as bad a burn as you can get in your official chronicle. Also, most of his Austrian and Styrian nobles didn't like him all that much. They did follow him against King Adolf, but that was an exception to the overarching rule of, hey, Albrecht, fuck you. That said, Albrecht did inherit his father's mind for strategy and negotiation. He just lacked the affable exterior that made all of his power grabs and ambitions look like, ooh, we're just having a nice, friendly time. Let's all get along, guys. He was very bad at that, so all of his ambitions were just kind of out there. But he managed to get the electors to vote for him again after Adolf died, so that way he could do an election without duress, so to speak. And he won. Unfortunately, the Pope at this time, Boniface VIII, had been kicked out of Rome, which is now a common occurrence, and he decided to throw a temper tantrum when Albrecht sent an envoy to ask for the Pope to confirm his ascension. Boniface wanted the electors to ask permission first and then vote. He also claimed that the Pope was, in fact, the King of the Romans and the Emperor. Which is, kind of wild to say from a spot in exile outside of your own capital city, Mr. Pope. Albrecht didn't have the resources at the time to go kick the Pope's ass for that, and the Pope didn't have the resources to make good on that frankly bogus claim that he was the King of the Romans and the Emperor, so it's all just kind of hot air. But this was a problem because the Pope was the only one who could crown him emperor, and as I explained last time, unless you can be crowned emperor, you can't really pass the king title onto your son and ensure the succession. While he was getting bullied by the Pope, Albrecht also did the worst possible thing imaginable and make an alliance with the French by marrying his son to a daughter of the French king. But that's not the terrible part. The terrible part is that because of that marriage, the county of Burgundy is now Franche-Comté, despite having been part of the empire since the days of Barbarossa and having never really been French before that. He also handed over a bunch of territory in the Low Countries that put the imperial French border along the River Maas instead of, having that little bulge that went out into Belgium, France area. The electors, much like myself, were really upset at this since he basically went and threw away a bunch of imperial land for his own family's gain. And when Albrecht went and ratified the treaty anyway, the electors, rightfully, in my opinion, went to war. After all, there is no greater evil than condemning a man to be French. Unfortunately, the electors weren't able to mount much of a resistance since they had just finished taking on Adolf von Nassau and pulling out Nassau's family's interests out of the region. So they were a little low on resources. Philip the Fair, the King of France that Albrecht had allied with, decided to walk down to Italy and smack the Pope across the face and then drag him to Avignon, where the papacy would essentially be France's pet for 30-odd years. Got a swanky-ass house, though. This made Boniface accept Albrecht's rise to power. Yippee. Meanwhile, just like their fathers before them, Albrecht and King Wenceslas of Bohemia got into a rivalry, since both were seeking to replace the dynasties of Hungary and Poland that had just died out. Wenceslas came out the winner and all that, but he really only controlled a little bit of Hungary and Poland each, and that victory only lasted a little bit as Albrecht attacked again, and King Wenceslas II died, passing his throne on to Wenceslas III, who was an incompetent asshole and really shit at his job. He immediately surrendered, since in Poland he was facing Casimir the Great, who would go on to reunite all of Poland, and gave up on Hungary to focus on Casimir the Great, because he's called Casimir the Great, you can kind of infer that that didn't really work out for him. Wenceslaus got assassinated soon after, and this is a thing that's growing more common as time goes on. Assassinations were not really like that common back during the time of the Hohenstaufens, which was not really that long ago, maybe like 100 years ago. There's like one assassination of Philip of Swabia, and that is like huge news. Like, whoa, you're not supposed to do that, dude. But I guess that kind of opened the floodgates, because now in like the latter half of the 1200s, people are like, guys, what if we just kill him? The Premislids, by the way, who die out with Wenceslaus III, are among the many great houses who died out in the 1300s because of all the fucking chaos that was going on. The Premislids, mind you, have ruled Bohemia pretty much since its inception, and now we're just gone. So for the first time in like 400, 500 years, Bohemia is just up for grabs. So of course, Albrecht tries to grab it. But by that point, Albrecht was stretched too thin to win that war, and the son he tried to place on the throne died. And then, to make matters worse, Albrecht gets also assassinated. One of the very few kings of the HRE to do so. Last one was Philip of Swabia, as I mentioned before. Albrecht's brother Rudolf was supposed to inherit the throne from their father, but he died before that could happen. This younger Rudolf left a son, Johann, who had no titles and no land, but whose mother was the daughter of Ottokar of Bohemia. So if anyone had a claim to the Bohemian crown, it was Johann, not Albrecht's son, who he tried to place on the throne. So Johann demanded that his uncle make him his candidate for King of Bohemia. Albrecht, invites them all to a banquet in Winterthur, and upon Johann's arrival, instead of giving him a crown to signify, you are my chosen candidate for King of Bohemia, he gives him a flower crown. Johann perceived this as an insult, and to be honest, I probably would too. And so the next day, this is something I would not do, and I do not relate to Johann on. Johann and his friends jump Albrecht and murder him without saying a word, and then run away, and he's never seen again. So yeah, boom, another king dead, and that is kind of the nail in the coffin of Rudolf I's attempt to start a dynasty. So for now, at least, Habsburgs fucking out of the game. And next time, the Luxembourgs will be in with their first actual emperor in like 50 years. And that is part 2 of the Interregnum. We covered up until the actual game getting to start, because these first 2 technically are involved, but I like to think of it as like Rudolf, I consider a primary player, and then everything from Rudolf to Henry VII, who's the next guy, doesn't really count, because they were kind of just fucking around for however many years. But starting next time, it will get a little more exciting, more power plays, actual attempt to get crowned emperor. Except I'm probably not going to be able to make any more Interregnum videos until like sometime in the winter. But yeah, my next few videos, I'm just gonna churn out fucking whatever I want. That's what I'm gonna do. Whatever I feel like making. I'm gonna try and stick to, a 2-week release schedule, but I'm not gonna promise anything until like December. Which is, oh wow, that's actually half a year from now. Probably earlier than that. When I'm back, okay? While I'm, you know what? You'll never know when I'm away, because I'm gonna make a bunch of content about random shit that I want to make content about. I'm just gonna release it in a fucking random schedule. Yeah. Okay. Bye. See you.